Hello, Center Street family. The book of James says that the testing of our faith produces endurance. I hope that you are enduring today and growing stronger in your faith. I love you and I miss you.
Good evening and welcome to the Center Street Church of Christ midweek devotional. Tonight our topic is entitled Becoming a Difference Maker with the Power of Jesus. If you have your Bibles, you're going to want to turn to John chapter 6. John chapter 6. An interesting thing about this particular narrative, this is not just recorded in John chapter 6, but it's also recorded in Matthew 14, Mark chapter 6, and Luke verse 9, which tells you that this narrative was very important to the gospel writers, and them being inspired by God was very important that God would allow us to discuss this evening and to allow us to consider this particular narrative in the life of Jesus. When you think about making a difference, sometimes we think making a difference means doing something big. But John chapter 6 teaches us really just the other. Read along with me. Sometime after this, Jesus crossed to the far shore of the Sea of Galilee, and a great crowd of people followed him because they saw the miraculous signs he had performed on the sick. Then Jesus went up on the mountainside and he sat down with the disciples. The Jewish Passover feast was near. When Jesus looked up and saw a great crowd coming toward him, he said to Philip, "Where shall we buy bread for these people?" He asked this only to test him, for he already had in his mind what he was going to do. Philip answered and said, 8 months' wages would not buy enough bread for each one to have a bite. Another of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, spoke up. "Here is a boy with 5 small barley loaves and 2 small fish. But how far will they go among so many?" And Jesus said, "Have the people sit down." There was plenty of grass in the place, and the men sat down, about 5,000 of them. Then Jesus took the loaves and he gave thanks, and he distributed to those who were seated as much as they wanted. And he did the same with the fish. When they had all had enough to eat, he said to his disciples, "Gather the pieces that are left over. Let nothing be wasted." So they gathered them, and they filled 12 baskets with the pieces of the 5 barley loaves left over by those who had eaten. You know, those are one of those incredible stories, and when you really look at the context and the narrative of it, you realize that 5,000 men, not counting women or children. But you also realize something there that's really interesting. These 5,000 plus, could have numbered maybe 10,000 more, was fed beginning with the sack lunch, if you will, what I call the boy that was the brown bagger, and his 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. There's something to be said about that. And there's something interesting in this whole dynamic. You know, this makes me think about, and I've told this story before, about before Savannah was born and the boys were little. You know, Caleb at the time was around 6 years old, and John was around 4, and Zach was 2 years old. And I'd been raised my whole life to raise gardens and to grow things. I love this time of year. I love growing things and watching things grow and harvesting things. I know many of you love that also. My dad, as long as I've known him, I know he's gardened and raised things for over 60 years. And my grandfathers were farmers, and they raised things. So maybe it's just in my DNA. And so I wanted to teach my kids at a very young age about growing things and want them to be interested in that. And so one particular time we came down, and this was one of their first times that they really got an opportunity to go in the garden with Dad. And I was preparing the ground, and I brought the 3 boys over, and I said, "Boys," I said, "I want you to grow something in this garden. I want you to raise something yourself in this garden. Of course, they were excited because, after all, they got to be in Dad's garden, which sometimes was a rarity, especially with kids. And I said, no, I'm going to till up some ground here, and you can plant what you want. Just what do you want to grow? Well, Caleb, wanting to be like Dad, I'm a bean guy. I love beans. My dad's a potato guy. And he looked at me and he said, Dad, I want to raise beans. And I said, okay. Well, I'll let you raise some beans. And so I gave him some seed, probably Kentucky Wonder Blue pole beans, because those are really cool because you put poles down and everything. And so he took that. And then Zach, being the youngest at the time, he wanted to make hills because that way he could play in the dirt and he could make some hills. And so therefore he wanted to grow some cucumbers. And cucumbers are kind of cool, how they spread out and everything. And so I looked at John and I said, John, what is it you want to grow? And John at the time had a big head of hair, a beautiful blonde mop, if you will. It was one of those bow haircuts, and with a full face and with a big smile, he looked at me. He says he wanted to grow peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. Wow. How do you approach that? I mean, are you going to shatter his dreams? Are you going to pull the carpet from underneath him? Are you going to come down and laugh and say, well, you can't do that? Well, that wasn't the way that I went. And to be honest, I can't quite remember. I think I redirected the conversation with him. But I wonder sometimes about Jesus. You know, Jesus, if you go in Mark's account, told the disciples to feed them. And Philip said, 8 months' wages couldn't feed all these folks. And if you put that in this common, everyday Arkansas language, 8 months' wages and an average salary in Arkansas would be as much as $30,000. If the average is around $50,000 in Arkansas, it'd take $30-some-odd thousand to feed this many people. Who has that kind of money? It's a lot, isn't it? So Philip was being, hey, I mean, he was the accountant, it sounds like, of the bunch, at least at that moment. And so then you consider what this boy was willing to offer. How do you tell this little boy, son, appreciate what you've done. You've brought your sack lunch, but just take it back with you and enjoy what, your mom prepared for you, or maybe what you prepared for you, and we'll work this thing out. It was late in the day, the Bible says, and the people were hungry. But there's something else that I've thought about when observing this particular passage. What about the other thousands of people? Are you telling me that they didn't have anything prepared? That they didn't just bring a snack for the day? Or they didn't have some, what we would think of today, like they didn't have a granola bar or some peanut butter crackers or something to chew on or something to eat? I mean, after all, these people were used to traveling from one town to the next town, and they went out in the wilderness and out by the Sea of Galilee to see Jesus. And surely that within all these numbers, somebody, quite a few of them anyway, had brought some provisions of some sort. And yet, the only amount that they were able to gather was that from the boy. You see, the boy was the one who was willing to give. That makes me wonder sometimes. It's easy to want to hoard things, to keep things, to have things. I mean, look at our closets. Look what's going on right now with the COVID virus. We already know that people are hoarding things and keeping metal supplies, and people go and they buy bags and bags of toilet paper and things of this nature. Why? I mean, to hoard things, to keep things, to take care of. Well, why do we do that? Well, sometimes we do that because we're really about number one. Other times it's the unknown, and we think that, well, if something happens, then we need this. And I'm not saying in any way we shouldn't make provisions or prepare for things. I think we should prepare for things. But sometimes we have a tendency to think that we have to keep everything that is ours, and we're unwilling to give. Apparently, these people among this multitude were unwilling to give anything. Maybe they were uncomfortable about giving. Maybe they thought, well, it won't really matter if I give this. I mean, this isn't enough to feed people. Maybe they thought things like that, but not the boy. Sometimes we think that. Sometimes we think that what we have to offer, it'd be uncomfortable to give in. And if we do, then it might be, it may come upon us to have to do more. And so therefore we don't want to go down that road. And so it's easier just to kind of keep it to ourselves and not do anything about it versus to give generously and to really put yourself out there. Well, that's what the boy did, even with so little that he had. There's three things I want us to notice about this in application. Number one, I want us to consider that the boy was willing to offer what he had. Whatever he had, he was willing to give. He was willing to give that sack lunch. He gave of his means. He gave how he was blessed. When you think of the talent man, the 5, the 2, the 1 talent man, had he been the 1 talent man, he would have gave it all. And yet the Bible tells us that the 1 talent man, he hoarded it. He kept it. He felt uncomfortable. And Jesus says the king said to him, away with him and take away what he has to where he has no longer. He is a wicked, lazy servant. And so we have to consider this evening that when we don't give, when we don't offer, when we don't serve, then we're not pleasing to God. And we all have talent. And we all have the ability to serve. We all have the way to help folks. And even if you think it's so little, consider Luke 21, the poor widow, and consider this particular narrative tonight. Something in the hands of Jesus can make such a difference. Number two, the boy made a difference. Okay? We're talking about him right now. If he didn't make a difference, he would never even been in the narrative. We wouldn't be talking about him tonight. If the poor widow had not gave of her means, we wouldn't be talking about it. But because he gave, he made a difference. People talked about this boy, no doubt. The disciples discussed this. They were inspired to write about it. Disciples, the first early church, talked about the lad, talked about giving. He was a difference maker. He wasn't one that when people talked about him, they talked about negativity, or they talked about, that he didn't really contribute much to life. And that brings us to the question, are we making a difference? How do people perceive Darren? How do they perceive you? What do they see? What is it in the course of conversation they say about you and they say about me? Do they say that I am a giver, I am generous, that I am loving, I am caring, I love my church, I love the brotherhood, I'm willing to sacrifice and serve? Do they say that about us? Or do they bring about and say things about us that none of us would be too proud of? You see, he was a difference maker, and people talked about him, no doubt, in such a way. And finally, when you consider this lesson, in the hands of Jesus, anything can happen. Anything can happen. All those assemblies that we attend, those Bible classes that we go to and we participate in, those works and those missions that we may be involved in, those devotionals that we may lead in and we participate in, those Bible classes that we may participate in or we may lead, those visits that you make, those notes that you write, those things that you share, your presence alone, those visits that we make to the sick and just doing all those things that sometimes we think are so little. And understand, folks, many times they go quite unnoticed. But they're not unnoticed by God. You see, the crowd, no doubt, probably didn't really notice the boy right off. And maybe even the disciples really did. And Andrew was the one that said, hey, he's got something to give. But Jesus noticed. And instead of turning the boy away, he took what he had. And in the hands of Jesus, differences can be made. Consider this evening the difference that you can make. It doesn't have to be big. It can be something that seems so small, and yet you can make a difference. The boy made a difference, and you can make a difference. Someone says, how? It begins with your relationship with God. And when you have the right relationship with God, you're going to love His people, and you're going to love His church, and you're going to learn to love your neighbor. And eventually, as time goes on, you'll learn to love your enemy. That's the nature of Jesus. So, you can make a difference. God bless you on this week. I know it's Passover week. I hope you enjoy that. Enjoy your time with your family. And remember the resurrection and what Jesus has done for us. Thank you.